I'm standing in the grounds of the Crayford Manor House. This has been the home of the Crayford Astronomical Society for some 35 years. Behind me is an observatory which holds a 24-inch telescope built by a founder member, John Wall. This telescope was also built by John Wall. It's an 8-inch refracting telescope. If you come with me, I'll show you another of his telescopes. Here we have John's 6-inch Cassegrain. As you can see, it is at the moment set up for observations of sunspot activity. Here is John. We'll have a word with him. And here's the man himself. John, how long have you been building telescopes?
Oh, about 43 years now. And I first got interested when I went to see the Festival of Britain, actually. When I was still in the army, went along in my uniform, you know, as a young, reamy bloke, and went into the Dome of Discovery. And there was this enormous, great 72-inch telescope that was going out to Australia, built by Grab Parsons. But that didn't impress me, that was too big. But up on the gallery, there was this 12-inch telescope that had been built by some amateur. Mm-hmm. And I fell in love with it, and I thought, that is really what I want to do. And I thought, that is it. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to build a telescope like that, you know. Yes. And then I had been interested in telescopes before, mind you, but only on a sort of casual scale with astronomy and everything. And I got the books, and I studied optics in the army, and couldn't wait to get out of the army and start work. And then I built my workshop, built my first 6-inch telescope, and then I built a 6-inch refractor. That was the second telescope I built, a 6-inch refractor. And then I went on to a 9-inch, a 10-inch, several 10 inches, 8 inches, 9 inches. I've lost count, actually. I've built hundreds, literally hundreds of telescopes. And then in about 1957, when Dr. Wilkins was here, he approached me. He knew I built telescopes. He approached me and he said, would you like to make a small telescope for the society? Well, it wasn't a society in those days. It was just the astronomy group, you know. Mm-hmm. And I said, yeah, I'd love to, actually. I said, as long as it's a 12-inch. And he sort of stood back a bit. And 12-inch boy, he said, because he was a Welshman, he was a lovely Welshman. He said, yeah, I can handle a 12-inch. And in those days, a 57 12-inch telescope was a big telescope. And I did. I made a trial mirror first. And meanwhile, we got a grant through the council, about £250 to build this telescope. And that was a lot of money in those days. And I bought a great chunk of glass from Grab Parsons, a big piece of borosilicate, and I ground this mirror. And then I built the telescope, and by that time they'd built the observatory. They got a resident student here who was an architect, and he designed the building, and they built it on top of an old boiler house, and with a sliding roof. And I installed the telescope, and we had the 12-inch for many, many years. Then Dr. Wilkins died, and it was dedicated to him. It was called the Wilkinson Memorial Observatory. Mm-hmm. Well, we used the 12-inch for many, many years, and then it got a bit old and a bit worn out, and I sent the mirror away for aluminizing, and it became degraded. They must have damaged it in some way or the other, and that put the telescope out of commission. So I dismantled it, and I put a 9-inch Cassegrain on it for a while. And one day the principal of the college came in and said to me, you people are not much interested in having a telescope anymore in the observatory, are you? He said, there's a grant for about £1,800 coming through for you to improve your observatory. So I said, wait a minute, I said, we're certainly interested. They said, well, what are you doing about the telescope? I said, well, I am going to build a 24-inch. I've always wanted to build a 24-inch, and I'll tell you, if you give us that, if you get that grant through, I'll donate that 24-inch to the observatory. Uh-huh. Oh, done, he said, and I did. And I spent 18 months building this telescope. I made all the optics and built the telescope. I made the optics previously, actually. I had done all that already. And I built the telescope in 18 months, and I installed it in the observatory, and it's been there ever since. Mm-hmm. Well,
have you built any lately?
Well, yes, I went on from there I like building big telescopes. I've got this sort of megalomania about it. And so I went on to a 32-inch. I bought a 32-inch blank of glass, and I ground it up, and I made a 32-inch sort of super Dobsonian at first. It wasn't very good. It was a cranky thing. I had problems, engineering problems with the bearings and everything, and it resided in its shelter at my place for about 2 to 3 years, and then I decided to dismantle it. And by that time I was enthused with building a proper 32-inch telescope. There was a reason for this, which I won't go into now. And I redesigned it, I refigured the optics, and I have built now a 32-inch equatorially mounted telescope, which I'm just finishing off at the moment, programming all the defects out of it and doing sky tests and everything, and hopefully one of the members of the Crayford Society will be taking this on board. But meanwhile, not wanting to stop there, I purchased a 42-inch blank, and I ground a 42-inch mirror, and the last year I started building a 42-inch telescope, and I'm well into that now. I've got a lot of expertise in building big telescopes, and this one's going together quite quickly now, and the construction is becoming quite advanced. But behind that I've made a 48-inch mirror, which is not complete yet. It's just been polished and put on one side, and that will probably be my last telescope in the distant future. You know. But meanwhile, the 42-inch is everything, and I'm spending all my expertise on building this telescope up there.
Would you mind if we came down and had a look at your workshop?
Yeah, sure. Yes, certainly come down to my place, and I'll show you the facilities I've got down there, all the other optical work I'm currently doing as well. I don't just build one telescope, I have parallel projects going as well, smaller projects. I'm quite busy, you know. Yeah,
okay,
do come down.
Right, now I think we'll go down to John's workshop, if you'll follow me.
This is the my grinding shop, and I've got a 14.5-inch Troopman refractor objective being ground there. First stage, grade 80. I'm hogging up the curve, and it's a job that can run itself for hours on end while I'm getting on with the engineering out in the yard there. All I have to do is occasionally come in here and change the grip, splash some water on, and then switch the machine on. That's the advantage of having a machine. And this is a long-term job I'm working on, and this will be possibly a telescope in a couple of years' time.
What is that on the rack, John?
This is a 10-inch refractor, which is up on test. It's another Schoopmann medial. It's about 95% corrected for colour and spherical aberration. This telescope was thrown together out of odd lenses, funnily enough, off the shelf, and that's pretty good going. What I'm doing is I'm going to have to re-correct one of the elements in the correcting cell here, regrind one of the elements to get the residual colour out, and to refigure the front end, the objective, in order to get rid of some residual spherical aberration, and the telescope will be perfect. I've had this telescope in use, and believe me, it's pretty good as it stands. This is a Foucault tester here. There's the knife edge, and I can get focal positions on this Crayford eyepiece mount type focuser here. We've got a light source here, and I pipe light through these fibre optics to a tiny pinhole, which is just inside here. We're now going outside to see the 42-inch project. This is an alt-azimuth mounting for a 42-inch telescope. The fork here is made out of Dexion, heavy-duty Dexion, bolted together with fasteners, and all the stressing is taken by the framework itself. I have to put weatherproof covers over it to keep the rain off, because this telescope is going to stand out in the open all the time. It's not a good idea to pay out a lot of money to put a building around a 42-inch telescope. It's a very short tube telescope. The tube is only 10 feet long. when it's finished, of course. And I can just fit it into this part of the garden amongst all these other telescopes here. When it's complete, this telescope will be one of the largest telescopes in Europe, possibly the largest telescope in Europe. It is on what is known as a Texaro mount rather than the Dobsonian. That's why it's so free. Heavy duty bearings in this box below take the main thrust, and it's very slightly offset so that the bottom bearing will locate on a ring at the bottom so that it is kinematically stabilized. The similar arrangement will go on the tops of the forks here to support the tube in two V blocks with ball races in. This is a slightly better method of mounting a very heavy telescope because it's practically frictionless. As you can see, this telescope moves at a slight touch, and the tube will also move at a slight touch as well. Here we have one of the first weather panels, which is made out of 1/2 inch outdoor plywood, and it's heavily coated with yacht varnish, and it will be painted with barrier paint to make sure that it doesn't go rotten or warp. This merely keeps the water from getting inside the framing and rusting it, although the framing is made out of zinc plated angle section anyway. This is as far as I've got. It took me a week to build all this, and so far the telescope's been moving at a very, very fast pace. The bottom part was built over a year ago for a different project, and that project fell through, and I decided to use this mounting for the 42 inch. Now we're going to look at the mirror. Here's the 42 inch mirror, made out of inch thick green plate glass, float glass, which I ground about 5 years ago, and I tested it about a week ago up the garden and found that it was very close to a parabola. That's how it came out in the final polishing. I was so encouraged by this that I decided to build the 42 inch telescope on the spot, just like that. That's why that project's off the ground. It's at the moment it's just supported in a plywood frame to protect it, and also enables me to roll it around so I can do tests. It will be silvered chemically. I don't think there's a vacuum chamber in this country that will take a 42 inch mirror yet, so that's no problem. I've silvered mirrors before. And that is the engine room of my latest telescope. We shall be following this up over the following months as the telescope progresses with further discussions on the construction. You'll see it slowly build up and up until it's finally complete. Work has advanced, and as you can see, I have the centre box in position. This is the main structural part on which the tube will be bolted. It rotates freely in these trunnion bearings inside these casings here. It's made out of Dexion, sheeted in steel panels which are made from old shelving units. It's very rigid, and it takes all the main stresses of the tube itself and the mirror cell. Now, this can't be lifted in position just like that by one person, so I had to arrange this ski lift arrangement here, which is hinged onto this back frame. It slopes down, and I took this construction out of the workshop round here, slid it up to this position, lifted up the end of the ski lift, dropped 2 legs down until it was horizontal, and it was up at about that level. When I pushed it over into this position, I dropped the ski lift and it dropped down into the trunnion bearings, and then I took the ski lift away. It took about 10 minutes to get this from the workshop into this position. Now, I can work inside the telescope by passing up through this step arrangement here and work on the trunnion bearings when I do extra work on, build the tube framing which will rise from this position up to the top of the tube. The tube is a Serrier truss arrangement. Below, onto the bottom here, I shall fasten the mirror cell, which will come down to about that level. Now we'll go inside and we'll look at the mirror cell itself. This is the mirror cell. This is the back end, of course. These are shelving unit panels which are all bolted together to completely fill in the back of the cell. The sides are also sheeted in with old shelving panels bolted over a Dexion frame. Now this apparatus here is the eyepiece. This is the eyepiece position, and this is a waterproof cover on here. I won't take it all off, but it has a large rubber pad in there and a compression plate which seals off an aperture in here. Now the eyepiece will screw in when I want to use the telescope. Otherwise, afterwards I take it out, take it indoors and put that plate on, and it will be waterproof and weatherproof. The ray paths from the secondary mirror will pass up this way on a diagonal axis, so that the eyepiece will stick out like that. Now I'll turn the mirror cell round and I'll show you the inside. Here's the inside of the cell. This framing here will take the weight of the mirror. It's attached to the outsides of this casing. Notice the casing is made out of Erecto angle, or Dexin if you like, firmly integrated with the sheet metal sides. On here I shall put on the flotation table that will support the back of the mirror. This little stud here marks the exact centre, the geometrical centre of this box, so that I can mark out the positions of the three main support studs for the flotation table. This will be attached to a little trolley I have here. I shall bolt that onto that, and I can then wheel this whole thing out through the door, around the telescope mounting out there, up to the ski lift, and this one will also be bolted to the underside of the centre box, so that I'll be able to get that into position as well. This is as far as we've got. This is nearly finished. I've got about another month's work building the flotation table, and then I will wheel it out and box it, as I said. This is as far as we've got with the project. We shall come back later when I'm starting to build the tube and this is in position.
The project has now been running since October 94. It is now June 95. Let's have a look and see how John's getting on with the project.
Work has progressed further, as you can see. I've fitted doors onto the centre box here, which open out like this to expose the mirror, and I've also put A-frames on here, which are necessary because I shall have to move the whole telescope up and down against the weight of the mirror cell here, which will be bolted onto the end here at a later stage. Now the mirror cell has been transported from the workshop round here on a dolly and put up on that ramp, and what I've got to do now is slide this into that position there while this is pointing upwards and bolt that onto the back here. Now I've got this in position here, I've only got to jockey it around a bit, and by using jack screws through here I can lift this cell up into this piece here and bolt it in position. That's the next job. That will take several hours of work. Right, the mirror cell is now bolted to the centre box. Earlier you saw the mirror cell on the ramp, and I was able to jack the mirror cell up by using long jack screws off the ramp onto the centre box, and then insert a whole row of bolts along here and around the other side and inside, incidentally, to fasten this part very securely to that part, and then it was sealed with a sealant all round to stop the water from getting in. This hole here, or this after, is the entrance for the mirror. These rails here are supports for the mirror when it's slid in. Now, in order to get the mirror up to that position, I've got to build a special ski ramp arrangement, which will be a permanent feature of the telescope, by the way, or stored in off-site when it's not in use, where the mirror can be slid up and in onto these support rails. Then the flotation system will be screwed up onto the back of the mirror, and the mirror will be lifted off the rails by about 1/4 of an inch, and then it will be truly supported on its flotation table. The mirror is retained by a steel strap that goes round it and to hold it in position, and then a watertight cover goes on here to seal the mirror cell completely against the weather, although this part faces downwards in the stowage position, so any water will not necessarily get in there. Now up here I have built a jigging frame on those two A-frames there. That is a device for finally assembling all the other A-frames of the tube and the top ring, which will eventually be bolted on the top. Now I'm going to pull the telescope down and demonstrate how one of the other A-frames will be assembled to the jig and other features of the main body of the telescope. What I'm going to do now is take an A-frame from about over there and insert it into this jig up against this bolting on point there, just to show how it's actually done. I'm not going to actually assemble the A-frames now. This is just a demonstration of what will happen in the future. Well, you just saw me insert the lower A-frame, a couple of retaining nuts and bolts there just to hold it in position, and this jig is now obvious that it supports this end in order that I can assemble the frames without any problems. I'll have to do a similar thing for the top frame, but of course I've got to build up a little scaffolding there in order to stand on it, in order to get the top A-frame in position and bolt it up correctly. That, I think, explains that part quite adequately. The front end of the mirror cell here is covered by 2 weatherproof doors. I'll just demonstrate how this works. 2 ordinary drawer bolts here, and the doors open and clip back. Exposing the mirror for observation. Now, there's the interior of the mirror cell and centre box. The mirror, 42-inch mirror, will be facing me here. Now, if we go around the other side, I'll show where the observing station will be. Up there, top right corner, there is a square aperture. Now on that corner will be bolted an observing station, an eyepiece, instrument stand, etc., in order to receive the light from the secondary mirror, which will be up that end of the telescope. The light comes into the telescope, is focused by the mirror in that direction, received by a big flat mirror, which will send it up to that corner. And that's where you observe. In order to observe horizontally, of course, we'll have to be standing up at that height, but astronomically the eyepiece will be about down here to about down here, so really most of the observations can be done standing on the ground. Under here you can see the aperture that you saw earlier where the mirror goes in. This of course will be covered by a weatherproof panel. And as you can see, that if it rains, the water will just pour off and will never go inside there. Over here is the other project I'm working on. It's nearly completed. In its final trials, it's a 32-inch telescope on an equatorial mounting. And I am working on the observing station optics. Are having to replace bits, redesign bits, redevelop bits, and at the moment I'm testing out a new transfer lens on the eyepiece end there. And last night I headed on Jupiter, which was quite low in the sky, and got reasonably good images, except for that fact that this telescope was in the way and the end of that shelter was in the way. I got Jupiter quite adequately, and under better seeing conditions I hope to get fair images. I'm also testing out the drive, other things, lots of ironing out lots of problems, minor problems that still exist, and very soon now I shall submit the telescope to the persons who wish to use it. It will be eventually dismantled and transported to a proper observing site. It's certainly not going to stay there, not for another year anyway. This is the top ring, which bolts on the very end of the telescope. This structure will hold this big secondary mirror and also tie in all the A-frames into a unity to make it extremely stiff. Made up of, as you can see, Dexium. It's jigged together on a hardboard subplate here, on which the actual shape had been accurately drawn, and all the angles were then bolted to it according to the lines I've drawn on. I will now build this frame up by inserting corner plates and spanning plates here and so forth. Now then, I'm going to talk about the finder. This is the finder for the 42-inch telescope. It magnifies about 10 times. These are watertight covers. The idea is that this telescope stands out in all weathers with the covers on. This is an old Taylor Hobson 20-inch focal length f6.3 camera lens, which is being pressed into surface as an objective for this finder. Also an eyepiece from another piece of equipment, which has a nice greticle in it. I built the rest. Waterproof covers. Now that will stand out in the rain at all weathers, so that when it's on the telescope one really takes covers off to use it. This is the observing station, set at a slight angle because the rays from the secondary come in at an angle, and the top right hand corner configuration I talked about earlier is like that, if you like, and the eyepiece mount which screws in there will stand out here. A waterproof cover goes over the top of this, which has a rubber gland on it, so this can be sealed off when the telescope's not in use. The instrumentation that screws in here will be taken indoors and stored in a special cabinet. All fine instrumentation will be taken away from the telescope. So that is the observing station. Oh, this is a panoramic shot of Telescope City, if you like. A typical suburban back garden filled with giant telescopes. The 32 inches on the right there, and the 42 inches in the background. The further work will be done on the 42 inch, of course, because it's about half complete, and we will be coming back to that in a future date.
It's now July and it's been a very long hot summer, and John has been getting on very well with the 42 inch. But first of all, we'd like to, in the next section, have a look at one of John's old telescopes and then move on to the 42 inch.
Well, this is the old 20-inch telescope which has been here for the last 30 years, and as you see I'm beginning to take it to pieces because it's no longer usable. It's gone very rusty, and the observing site around here is very bad, and I don't get a chance to use it anymore, and I'm taking it to pieces to make a little bit more room around here in order to build this one, the 42 inch, which of course is not going to stay here, it's going somewhere else eventually. There used to be a big refractor stuck on the side here. That's been taken off and it's now in storage in the workshop there, and I shall remount that later on, possibly as a personal telescope for my own use up in the garden there by the house, and I can come out and look at the moon or a couple of planets whenever I feel the need to do so, just to have a look round sort of thing. Certainly not to do any serious astronomy here. Well, the A-frames have now all been assembled, and that square arrangement at the top is a building jig which holds all the A-frames in their correct positions. Eventually I'm going to put a proper top ring on the top which will tie them all in and hold the secondary components. The staging here is a special lifting stage on which I will place the mirror and slide it in through that port onto the flotation table in the telescope. You saw me lift this up just now. The idea being that when it's laid in its resting position, I can roll the mirror in its box, take it out the box and slide it on there to about that position, pull this up and then slide it horizontally into the telescope. This will be a permanent feature to be used subsequently for resilvering the mirror. When I want to resilver the mirror, I'll deploy the telescope into that position, take the mirror out to about here, and then I can silver it, chemically silver it out in the open on a nice day like this. Doesn't matter if you do it outside. Now, the telescope moves quite sweetly. It's nicely balanced at the moment, and as you see, it takes very little effort to pull it down to the horizontal position. And that, of course, is the sort of balance I've got to maintain all the way through its construction. Now we're going to the workshop and I'll show you the top ring, which is now being completed. That will eventually bolt onto here. This is the top ring, made up of Daxion and joining plates, and this is the spider and the central tube which will support the secondary mirror. This is all made of stainless steel. It will stand out in the weather, of course, and not go rusty. This weighs precisely 51 pounds, so it's a lightweight structure where telescope construction is concerned. The whole idea, of course, is to keep this end of the telescope as light as possible, to cut down the number of counterweights I'll have to put on the mirror cell end in order to balance the tube. Now, earlier on I made reference to the 20-inch telescope being dismantled, and I said the refractor was inside, and here is the refractor. It's a 10-inch aperture dialight telescope. It has a simple element lens up there. It has a correcting lens triplet there, a flat mirror at the end of the tube, and the eyepiece is inside this can here. I won't take it off because it's a bit stiff. Now I'm going to preserve this telescope because it's unique. It's going to be cleaned, stripped down, optics cleaned, repainted, re-weatherproofed, and I'm going to put it on a separate mounting as an actual telescope in its own right. It's unique. It's possibly the only dialight telescope in the world. Pure classical dialight telescope. So it's worth preserving.
It's now September and the nights are drawing in. John's finished his outdoor activities, the mirror's in place and also the top ring. Let's go and have a look and see what sort of work he's done over the year.
Well, as you can see, the telescope construction is considerably advanced. Last time I talked about putting the mirror on the ramp and sliding it up into the mirror port and assembling it into the cell. Well, that has already been done. The reason why we didn't film this is because it was a very delicate operation and one had to be very concentrated on how it was done. Fortunately, the mirror went in very, very, very smoothly, and I was able to assemble it and put all the fastenings on within an hour, and I had the mirror cell closed up within a couple of hours. Very happy about that. Now, from that stage, I have dismantled the special ramp and parked it over here. This is a permanent feature now, this telescope. This will be restructured for another site as the permanent mirror extraction and insertion model, if you like, because the mirror will have to be taken out and silvered periodically. The mirror at the moment is not silvered because I wish to do star tests on it as it is before I actually finally silver it. This can be done on bright stars, by the way. Now, the top ring that you saw earlier in earlier shots has been completed, painted and now assembled to the other end of the telescope onto the A-frames. The A-frames are now all tied solidly together. The jigs have been removed and all we have is a constraint here for holding the telescope in one fixed position. It's biased rather heavily on this end. There's about a 15 to 20 kilogram bias on that end because the telescope is not fully balanced yet, and it rests on this frame. It's also tied down with the rope there to stop any windage causing the telescope to swing around. It has been windy the last couple of days. Eventually I'll have to balance the top ring by applying weights on the mirror cell there, and that is the stage at which the telescope will rest for the time being. This winter I have to figure the secondary mirror in the optical shop and build the mirror cell, the secondary mirror cell, which will fasten to that centre boss there. This will happen next spring sometime. The telescope is now more or less complete as it stands. It's fully painted, it's newly painted. Not much more will be done to this telescope now except building the drive units, which will go on the other side. That will be a job for next year, but as it stands the telescope is nearly complete. It's fully painted and it's now proofed against the vagaries of the coming winter climate. It's now autumn. In a couple of months' time hopefully it will start raining and then we'll get the frosts and probably a covering of snow on it and all that sort of thing. The final job outside here will be to balance the tube as it stands so that it's freestanding and balanced, and then when the secondary mirror is put on I will have to balance the secondary mirror, and that will be the final work on the actual telescope. Around the other side, on the other fork, I am going to build a slow motion drive for altitude of the telescope so that it can be motorized by a pushback control at the eyepiece up there, and also build a drive unit to slew the telescope in azimuth very slowly, and hopefully later on with the right amount of stepper motors and such, and it'll be possibly computer controlled. But at the moment it's going to be manual, especially while I'm doing the optical tests to prove out the telescope for feasibility actually. Well, that is the state of the art at the moment. There will be possibly a few more shots of the telescope when it's freed and balanced, and I will push it around and point it at the sky here and there. The telescope hasn't been fully deployed yet, and it's going to be a task in itself to see whether the telescope really will swivel around in this small area here, whether there are any hitches, anything jamming up and this sort of thing, but I'm confident that it will work quite well. That post up there is the connecting point to a radius arm that will come down to a drive unit which will exist here, bolted to there and engaging on there, and with a gear wheel and reduction motor and gearbox and everything, and it will very slowly slew the telescope in altitude to any position that you want by a paddle pushback control, which I'll hold in my hand while I'm looking through the eyepiece up there. That pillar also is a grab hold point for slewing the telescope manually around the sky to point at the object I want to look at. And those rings up there will contain the finder, so the finder, the eyepiece and the method of hauling the telescope around will be close to hand. Other handles will be placed here and there for pulling the telescope around on the ground here, preliminarily to pointing it up at the sky. Mostly the eyepiece position will be more or less at this height, so that most of the observing will be done standing on the ground rather than on a ladder. Oh well, that's it for the time being.
Now that winter's over, how are you getting on with the project, John?
Well, it's been a long winter because the snow and ice has been covering it. It's stopped me working on it. Now I'm beginning to do optical tests, getting some images, and I've got the telescope almost perfectly balanced in the last couple of weeks or so, fully deployed around the sky, and I've been working on the sun, getting solar images, and as the optics are not aluminized, I can look at the sun with the naked eye with just a slight modifying filter. And at first I couldn't find an image at all, and I had to do a lot of fiddling around with transfer lenses and found out that the actual focal position is 13 inches further towards the secondary mirror actually. It doesn't matter, but I've now got a new transfer lens in there, and I'm starting to get real images, and they're quite good. They're quite good indeed.
So would it be okay if we go and have a look, see what
Yeah,
we can
I'll
do?
just take you outside and we'll wiggle it around the sky. There are no other pieces in it, so I can't show you anything, but I'll show you how the telescope's deployed. So come this way and I'll show you.
John, I see we have the secondary mirror in position.
Yeah,
Tell us
all the
few
optics
things.
are in now. They're not illuminised, of course, but all the optics are collimated, tweaked, fairly online now, and I've been testing on the sun, getting images of the sun, unsilvered optics. You can actually look at the sun direct with just a little filter, and things are pretty good. I've been trying to find exactly where the focal plane is, and been adjusting transfer lenses and things, and I'm just getting on top of that problem. At first I didn't get anything at all, but now I'm getting nice sharp limb images of the sun, and I saw the moon the other night, Crotus and such, so we're really getting there. There's a lot of work to do yet, but this looks like it's going to be quite a nice telescope. Look how sweetly it's balanced.
Yes, it's running very finely.
Yeah, it's on a Texaro mounting rather than a Dobsonian. You couldn't get a Dobsonian of this size to move so sweetly because that works on friction. This is a frictionless, absolutely frictionless mounting. And this weighs about as much as a family car, and yet I can move it just like that. Just like that. You couldn't do that with a Dob this size. That's where it really is superior. Get a bit dirty, you say, but that's what happens when you stick it out the motor. I'll just move it around for you in order to show you how it deploys. Actually, you could use this telescope without drives on a non-windy night. I've actually been using it on those street lights over there to find images, and I've looked at the moon, there's really no problem. But it's going to be computer-controlled drives eventually. But there we are.
What size is the finder you have on the top there?
Oh, that finder is about a 3-inch. It's an old photographic objective, and it's about 20 inches focal length.
Yes.
And it is in keeping with the size of the telescope.
Yes, I noticed.
Yeah, it magnifies about, I think it magnifies about 10 times, something like that. This bit here is for the drive unit. Well, I'll park it, and we'll go in and see my artificial lightning machine.
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Alright, okay then. There we go. If you'll come in.
John, we're at your laboratory. Would you like to tell us a few things that you have in here?
Principally I do optical work in here. I have a small optical bench here which is going to be upgraded. And at the moment I'm programming a piece of equipment here which feeds light into a ground-mounted spectrometer. It's a transfer lens system, a beam splitter, a monitoring eyepiece here, and a fibre optic. This fibre optic connects into a mount here and goes down to a spectrometer on the front, a ground-mounted spectrometer. And I'm building that at the moment. That's down the workshop. And I'm going to bring that all in here, and I'm going to test it all out with various discrete emission lamps, that sort of thing, and find out exactly what it does, you know. I'm not quite sure of one or two parameters. There's ordinary white light source coming in here, and this is a relay lens which feeds an artificial star onto Fabrinet in here. That's the optical project at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Also interested in artificial lightning.
Mm.
I've got a Tesla coil here, which I won't demonstrate because it's very dirty in electromagnetic radiation. It
Ah,
cuts
yes,
everybody's television out within
Mhm.
100 metres, and really is a naughty thing to run, so I don't. And I've got two Wimshurst machines here which generate very vast quantities of static electricity. This one and that one, and this generates just under 1 million volts. This one about 400,000 volts, and I just play around with this. Sometimes I do some work in it, but I'm not doing any sort of serious. This is more or less a hobby, if you like. I just like building machines because I love lightning. I go and watch thunderstorms. I'm a lightning bug, you know. And that's about it. And there'll be further work on the 42-inch telescope. It looks like it might be a reasonable telescope, and we'll be probably hearing more about that.
Right. Well, I'd like to say thank you very much, John.
My pleasure.
It's been a pleasure having a look around and having
Fine.
see what you've been doing.